All right, tonight we are going to be reading an excerpt from a larger book titled Tripping Over the Lunch Lady and Other Stories. It's by several famous authors, but the story that we are reading tonight is by David Lubar. Turn to your book to page 222, and we're going to read a little bit about the author. I'm at the top of the page where it says Meet the Author. David Lubar. David Lubar originally aspired to become a comedian. He sold a joke for 75 cents and still has the check. He also loves pinball and even created an Atari pinball game. With 13 books, including Dog Days and Flip, and many video games to his credit, Lubar has a remaining goal: to write a movie or a cartoon show. And the illustrator is below. Meet the illustrator, Mackie Pamington. Mackie Pamington was born in the Philippines. His parents found that keeping Mackie busy with pencils and paper was the best way to keep him happy. As an adult, Pamington moved to California. He is the illustrator for the book series Weird Planet and Nancy Drew and the Clue Crew. Alright, so remember, as you're reading, you are looking for 5 words that you don't know, and you're going to use context clues like we did in class today to help you come up with your own definition of the word. And once you kind of have a definition, you're going to write the definition on your post-it note and the page number that helped you come up with it, and you'll just stick that on the page. And if you need to stop the reading so you can do that, that's okay. You can always just press play again. I'm going to turn the page to page 224. And let's get started. When Miss Adler assigns groups for projects in her 6th grade science class, she has one team member draw names from a box. That's how science geek Amanda finds herself in a group with the class clown, Benji, Miss Perfect Ellen, and the mysteriously silent George. Unlike oxygen and hydrogen, some things didn't combine very easily. For example, argon, neon, and the other inert gases. Or the 4 of us. Ellen and George didn't move. Ellen obviously wanted everyone to come to her. George didn't seem to care who went where, so I walked over to his desk. So did Benji. Ellen had no choice except to join us. "Hey," Benji said, spreading his warm, wide group hug. Ellen and I both went, "Ew." Some things were too gross even for calm, detached scientists. "Just kidding," Benji said. "Knock it off," I said. "We need to get organized." "Who said you were in charge?" Ellen asked. "I'm good at science," I said. "So am I," Ellen said. "And I'm organized." She held up her notebook, which was disgustingly neat. My notebook looked like the wrapper of an exploded firecracker, which didn't mean I wasn't a good scientist. I'd just been too busy to straighten it out. Though I'm sure I could never get Ellen to believe that I knew what I was doing. Trying to think of a scientific approach to picking a leader. Meanwhile, George reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter. He flipped it into the back of his left hand, covered it with his right hand, and looked at Ellen. "That's no way to pick," she said. He looked at me. "Heads?" I said. Heads it was. "So when shall we meet?" I asked. It turned out that they had stuff going on all week, except for today, right after school. 3 coin tosses and a short argument later, we agreed to meet at my place. "My room is a little messy," I warned everyone. "Messy room, messy mind," Ellen said. "Empty room, empty head," Benji said. Much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to like him. We met outside after school and walked to my house. On the way, Ellen mentioned 37 reasons why she was so great and wonderful and perfect. Benji made 19 jokes, and George kicked a rock. When we went inside, my mom got all excited. "Oh, you brought friends, Amanda! How nice! I'll make snacks." She seemed to think I spent too much time by myself. "Watch your step," I warned everyone as we approached my room. I pushed against the door. It didn't move. I leaned into it and gave a hard shove. "Ew, you want us to go in there?" Ellen scrunched up her face. Hey, it's not dirty. It's just messy. I walked over various piles of clothes, books, magazines, and other essentials that plopped down on my bed. Okay, actually, I plopped down on the clothes that were on my bed. Ellen tiptoed in, followed by Benji and George. George sat on my hamper. Ellen perched on the edge of a chair. You should fire your maid, she said. Ours would never leave a room like this. I ignored her. Wow, it's sort of like you live inside a laundry basket. Benji walked over to the highest mount of clothes, right near my bookcase, and reached up. Hey, I can touch the ceiling. He thumped his chest and shouted, I'm king of the laundry! I'm at the top of 226. Cut that out, I said. We have work to do. Knock, knock. My mom appeared with a tray stacked full of goodies. Before anyone could speak, she'd handed each of us a plate, turkey sandwiches and baby carrots with little dishes of ranch dip. Mom made great sandwiches. Okay, back to the project, I said. What about chemistry? Boring, Benji said. George nodded. I took a bite of my sandwich. I really loved chemistry, but I was willing to compromise. Biology? I asked. Not interesting, Benji said. George curled his lip. I took another bite and tried another field. And getting similar responses from them for everything I could think of, I looked over at Ellen, who would be sitting quietly eating her snack. Even there, she was disgustingly neat. I didn't see a crumb on her plate. She finished her sandwich and started on the carrot sticks. You like chemistry? I asked her. Astronomy, she said, dabbing a speck of mayonnaise from the corner of her lip with her napkin. That figured. I bet if I'd mentioned astronomy, she'd say she liked chemistry. We kept talking, but got absolutely nowhere. Ellen didn't like any of my ideas. I didn't like any of hers. Benji seemed more interested in touching the ceiling. And George just sat there. Though, compared to the noise everyone else was making, I had to admit I was beginning to appreciate the value of silence. We only had an hour because Ellen needed to leave for a piano lesson. When it was time to go, we agreed that everyone would think about stuff for a week. Then we'd get back together. Nice friends, my mom said, after they'd left. Wouldn't you like to have a neat and tidy room where all of you could hang out? It's fine the way it is, I said. I'd rather spend my time trying to understand the universe than straightening out one little unimportant part of it. We met the next week. Mom brought snacks again. And once again, we couldn't agree on anything. Finally, I said, look, we can't keep going like this. If we don't pick a project now, we're toast. Planning is important, Ellen said. So is toast, Benji said. But we aren't planning, we're arguing, I said. We are not, Ellen said. We are too, I said. Are not. Are too. R2D2, Benji shouted. You're the only one who's arguing, Ellen said. We argued about that until it was time for her to go. Third week. Third meeting. We might as well have been in third grade. Ellen and I argued. Benji seemed fascinated by his ability to touch the ceiling near my bookcase. I actually thought about moving the pile of clothes, but I sort of hated to spoil his fun. George kept his thoughts to himself, though he did seem interested in checking out some of the books I'd stacked up next to the hamper, which surprised me. We finally agreed that since we couldn't agree on a project, everyone would bring an idea next week, and we'd vote for the best one. Week 4. I voted for my project. Ellen voted for hers. Benji voted for Albert Einstein, and George didn't vote. But he did offer the use of his quarter. Look, I said, it's obvious we can't agree. So let's each start an actual project. Next week we'll pick the best one, and everyone will work on it. Okay, we're at the top of page 228. Week 5. We each decided we needed another week. Everyone left right after our snack. When Mom came back for the dishes, she sniffed, looked at my piles of clothes, and said, You really need to think about picking up. She was right. It was getting a little stuffy. But I couldn't pick things up just then. I needed to think about my project. so I found a more elegant solution. I opened a window. Week 6. What's that supposed to be? I asked Benji when he lugged his project into my room. He looked down at the pile of ice cream sticks and coat hanger wires attached to a board with bits of duct tape, bent nails, and large globs of glue. It's a roller coaster. You're kidding. He shrugged. It sort of fell apart. I'm not great with tools. I figured he'd make a joke about the project, but he just sighed and said, Sorry I let the group down. I looked over at Ellen, who hadn't brought anything. Did you start a project? I'd expect her to drag in a display chart of the life cycle of designer handbags. I tried to spot comets, she said. It would be so great to discover a new one. Dad bought me this excellent telescope last month, but it's been cloudy every night. I waited for her to say she was sorry, but she didn't. I guess the word wasn't in her vocabulary. I glanced at George. He shook his head and spread his empty hands. Then I looked at my desk, where I'd balanced a large board that contained my experiments. I'd grown crystals in various solutions. I guess we'll have to use mine, I said. Notice how the copper sulfate produces a... Just then, Mom appeared in the hallway with a tray. She pushed at the door. Then she pushed harder. There still wasn't enough space for her to get in. She gave the door a good hard shove. I could feel the floor shake. On my desk, the whole display started to slide. I tried to dash across the room, but I tripped on a pair of jeans. All of my hard work crashed to the floor. I lay on my stomach, staring at the icky mess. Mom put the tray down in the hall and squeezed through the doorway. That's it. I've had it. This room is a disgrace. She grabbed a handful of clothes from the floor. I expected her to drop them somewhere or toss them instead. Her eyes opened wide. Then she went, Ew! I looked over. Under the clothes was something. It was dark green and shriveled. What in the world is that? I leaned closer. It was some kind of food. That does it! Mom yelled. You are grounded until this room is clean. But disgusting. She shook her head and walked out. I stood there, staring at the thing. Whatever it was, I hadn't put it there. I was a slob, but I wasn't a pig. I spun toward her. If you mention your maid, oops, I skipped a line. Behind me, Ellen whispered something. I spun toward her. If you mention your maid one more time, I'm going to scream. Ellen flinched and backed away from me. I realized I was already screaming. I just wanted to tell you I was sorry, she said. What? I'm sorry. It's my fault. Your fault? She shrugged. I'm allergic to wheat. I let her words roll around in my brain for a second, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood what she meant. But the equations only seemed to have one solution. Ellen didn't eat bread. Ellen's plate was always empty. Ellen had just apologized. Are you telling me you've been stashing sandwiches in my room? Not sandwiches, just the bread. The turkey was delicious. Why? I didn't want your mom to think I didn't like her food. And I felt kind of funny about mentioning my allergy. I try so hard to fit in, but it's not easy sometimes. I'm not good at it like you are. You're just so comfortable with stuff. What? You don't worry about what people think, she said. I worry so much that I always end up saying the wrong thing. And you're so smart. I have to study so hard. I have to keep everything so carefully organized or I get lost. But you're so good at science. Oh. I'd definitely need to think about what she just said. I guess I'd been making a lot of assumptions, but at the moment, I had a more urgent issue to deal with. I looked at the moldy slab. How many? Every week, she said. Where? She went to various clothes heaps in my room and revealed the slices of bread, which ranged from slightly moldy to totally overgrown. Benji picked up the pieces and laid them on the desk. If the bread hadn't been buried in my wardrobe, like some sort of ancient Egyptian funeral offering, I probably would have found it pretty fascinating. I'm sorry, Ellen said again. I'll explain to your mom that this was my fault, and I'll help you clean your room, okay? If there's one thing I'm really good at, it's straightening up. She looked at me like she expected me to turn her down. She seemed really sorry. Sure, you can help. That would be wonderful. I'll help too, Benji said. George nodded. Thanks, I said as we tackled the top layer. This is great, but we still don't have a project. Sure we do. I was so shocked by the voice, I just stared at George. We do? Benji asked. George nodded and pointed at the bread. Mold, Ellen said. We have a whole display of the stages of mold growth. Yeah, I said. George was right. We had pieces of bread for each week. But is that enough? It was hard to imagine a whole project from some slices of moldy bread. Then I realized it wasn't just about mold growth. Look, I said, flipping a piece over. Ellen nodded. Mayonnaise. It's acidic. Yep. We have an example of mold inhibition, too. We just have to figure out a way to display it so you can see both sides. Great, Ellen said. But what if it's still not enough? Oh, there might be some more, Benji said. What do you mean? I asked. Promise you won't kill me? No. Promise you won't make it slow and painful? No, he shrugged. I sorta don't like turkey a whole lot. Oh, please don't tell me you've been stashing meat in my room, he nodded. Where? I sniffed and looked around. Benji pointed at the top of my bookcase. You slime ball, I said as I climbed a chair to take a look. Oh, yuck! There were 5 piles of turkey in various stages of decomposition, neatly laid out from left to right. It was absolutely disgusting. It was also pretty fascinating, and I guess I was relieved to know that the smell wasn't coming from my clothes. I looked over at George. What about you? Is there anything you don't like? He lifted a stack of books to reveal baby carrots. Good grief! How could all of you just hide food away like that? Well, Ellen said, the place is kind of a dump. If you don't care, why should we? When in Slobivia, Benji said, do as the slobs do. I couldn't argue with them. All they'd done was sink to my level. Maybe this was one area it wouldn't hurt for me to try to be a bit more like Ellen, but just a bit. No way would my pins ever match my wardrobe. We got back to work. At least at 5, I asked Ellen, don't you have a piano lesson? It won't hurt me to miss one. She flipped over her cell phone and made a call. Right after that, George left. I figured he had had some sort of appointment he couldn't cancel, but I was grateful he'd helped for as long as he could. There was still plenty to do. The rest of us kept working. I found it, Benji screamed a couple minutes later. What? I asked. The floor. I stared down at the spot where he pointed. So that's what it looks like. Nice rug, Ellen said. Thanks. I forgot I had one. Just as we were finishing, George returned holding a beautiful display case with sections for the bread, turkey, and carrots. It even had mirrors in it to show both sides of the specimens. Wow, I said. That's perfect. Did you build it? He nodded. You're a genius with your hands, I said. He smiled. Ellen patted him on the shoulder. And you don't waste time talking unless you have something to say. I'll do the captions, Benji said. He started coming up with these awful puns that made everyone groan, like Spore Score and 7 weeks ago, Rotten Roll, Bacteria Girl, but we laughed too. And I knew Miss Adler had a great sense of humor, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to use Benji's titles. Ellen, who had beautiful handwriting, lettered the signs. I typed a report to go along with the display. As we all finished up the project together, I realized I discovered an important scientific principle. It had nothing to do with mold, but everything to do with chemistry. Some elements combined quickly, others combined slowly, and some didn't combine at all unless you mix them together under high heat and intense pressure. We got an A. Miss Adler complimented us on our planning. I'm impressed, she wrote, that you worked so nicely as a group and immediately got started on a well-planned and complex project. Your use of familiar food items was especially clever. That afternoon, as I was leaving school, I found Ellen, Benji, and George waiting for me. Want to hang out? Ellen asked. Do you? I asked back. All 3 of them nodded. I thought about those reluctant elements again, the ones that didn't want to combine. When you finally got them together, they usually formed incredibly strong bonds. Seems a shame not to take advantage of all of our work cleaning your room, Ellen said. Good point. I didn't have the heart to tell them that half the floor had vanished again. They'd find out for themselves soon enough. On the other hand, it would give us something to do. There was one thing I had to tell them, though. This time, I think we should make our own snacks. They all agreed about that, too. All right, make sure you have those 5 Post-it notes, and we'll see you tomorrow.